The bottom line is we can argue, we can debate, we can discuss the merits, the pros, the cons, but in early 2017, Colin Kaepernick was still good enough to be on a team. The NFL, in my estimation, Mike, and I welcome all viewpoints on this, but my estimation, it's very simple. The NFL made a business decision that it had to make, and it's a business. What a shocker. It makes decisions, and it decided that its business interests were best served by not having Colin Kaepernick on a team than by having him on a team, because there was a cluster of fans who were going to huff and puff and blow part of the house down if Colin Kaepernick was still in the NFL. So that became a third rail. That became a point of contention. You had John Mara, the Giants co-owner at the time, talk about the number of angry letters he received from fans about the issue of players taking a knee during the anthem, and Colin Kaepernick was the guy who started it all. He was the first one to do it. He made the other players aware of their rights to do it whenever they wanted to do. He sparked the movement, and he was the name in the face that the 30% or so of the fans decided they were going to hate no matter what. They were never going to understand why he did it. They were never going to reconcile his reasoning. They weren't going to accept it. And the NFL just decided it's not worth it to us. We are going to listen to that percentage of the fan base that desperately wants us to not keep him around. So they didn't keep him around. And I say that I'm trying to be realistic. I don't know why anything would change now. What team is going to do business with Colin Kaepernick 5 years after this started? Nobody's going to. Nothing's changed.
Well, let's understand, when you say NFL, we mean owners. And just like when we talked about the Brian Flores, the lawsuit, and you asked me, how is it going to change? The Rooney Rule is not being enacted correctly. How is it all going to change? I said, when each one of those 31 owners, and again, not 32 because of the Packers and the publicly owned, looks in the mirror and decides they want to change, or the whoever they hand the team off to changes their way of thinking. That's when it changes. So let's apply that to Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick, first when he wanted to come back a while ago, it was like he still wanted $20 million. That was never going to happen. Then it was the league set up this kind of tryout for him, which he balked at and did his own thing. So there was always butting heads. He had said a lot of things about the NFL. One of them was, they treat players like slaves. It's like slavery. He had said a lot of bad things about the NFL. So while they were in that podcast, now I didn't hear it all, but as they were role playing, that's what a GM or a coach, or probably GM or an owner, is going to ask. What has changed your mind about our league that you said all those things about our league? And again, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just talking from the owner's viewpoint here. They would ask, what has changed? With you saying what you thought our league was and why it was so bad, now all of a sudden you want to play. What's changed? So I'm sure they would want to hear his answer about that, whatever it would be. And it may be you have end racism at the end of the back of the end zone and Black Lives Matter. Maybe he sees things going in the right direction. Because listen, this is not a difficult, from a football standpoint, he is not going to ask for $20 million. He said he'd be a backup. If he got offered league minimum somewhere, I'm pretty sure he would take it, because it really seems like now he wants to get back in the league. So from that side of it, let's not kid anybody. That's not a hard decision for some team to say, I don't know, for a veteran, what's league minimum, $750? We'll bring you in on that. That's the easy part. But does the owner want to bring him in and create whatever that would create? And I don't know what it would create at this point. But you said it earlier, and you're right. They don't want to do that anymore. They're afraid to do it. They've been rubbed the wrong way, too much headbutting with this to want to do it again. I don't know where his skills are. Listen, let's be honest. To think he's been out of the league 5 years and come in and recapture anything he did would be a very difficult thought. But from his standpoint, what he said, give it a shot. Bring me as a backup. What do you have to lose? If it's not happening, just cut me. So from the football side of it, Mike, it is very easy for a team to say, okay, here's a minimum contract. Come on in, you're the backup, and let's see what happens. But we all damn well know there's a lot of other reasons that these owners will not offer him a contract.
And, Mike, he's not blameless in all of this. I believe that it's possible to think he was wronged, but that at times he was not making the best decisions on how to convince people that he was in the right. And there had been questions of whether he wants to play football or whether he wants to be a martyr, whether he likes the role that he had fallen into once he was shunned by the NFL? Did he want too much money? We didn't hear him come out and say, I'll take a minimum salary job at any point in the last 5 years. And the thing that happened in 2019 with the workout, I mean, I'll boil it down very simply. I think both sides were grossly at fault in how they tried to haggle over a release that was intended to protect the NFL against any liability for any injury that he may have suffered. And Kaepernick's camp looked at it as they're trying to get him to sign a waiver of any lingering claims he may have for retaliation or collusion after the first settlement, because he still could have, and to this day could still file another claim.
Yep.
And I don't think there was good faith on both sides in working that out. I think both sides wanted to blame the other, and it became a political stunt. It became a PR game. So there has been fault on both sides. And even today, Mike, because look, I've been very firm in my belief that the NFL has screwed Colin Kaepernick, but I also believe that there are things he could have handled differently. There's a quote today. He says that he'll take whatever he has to do to get back in. If I have to come in as a backup, that's fine, but that's not where I'm staying. When I prove that I'm a starter, I want to be able to step back on the field. There's a heavy presumption in there that he's going to prove he's a starter. What if he believes he's proven it and the team hasn't? And I remember back when Tim Tebow had to decide, am I going to be a backup quarterback? Teams didn't want him around as a backup quarterback. You know why? Because the Tebow maniacs would have been demanding that he play. So that's the other side of this. If Colin Kaepernick comes through the door saying, I will humble myself to be a backup, but you know what? The minute I prove to you I'm the starter, I better be playing. That's not what coaches and GMs are looking to hear either. They don't want the player deciding when it's time for him to start, and then his supporters who are going to get louder and louder and louder. That's the kind of distraction that I think coaches and GMs rightfully should be trying to avoid, where you have outside voices or inside voices trying to tell you what the best decision is for your team. So when I heard that today, I thought, if I was thinking about this right now, I would at least want to peel that onion a little bit more to see what he's really saying there.
And nobody wants to. Nobody wants to peel that onion. Right now, nobody thinks the juice is worth the squeeze, right? I mean, they just don't. As I said, you could look at it strictly from a football standpoint and say, what do you got to lose? But to bring up what you said. So how long into it will he think, I'm the better player here, I should be the starting quarterback? And if he's not made the starting quarterback, what happens then? You know, that's what owners are fearful of. They don't know what the reaction will be. Because I agree with you. Through this whole thing, both sides are at fault. But so put that aside for a moment, and here we are. So here we are now with a guy who is basically saying, I'll come back. Man, I'm ready to come back. Just give me a chance. And I think a lot of owners just looking at their watches and saying, man, A, been too long. B, we just do not know. We can't kind of foresee what's going to go on here. So the thought that he will return and be a great quarterback is not great enough in their minds to say that it will probably be more to the other side of it, that he won't be, maybe won't be a starting quarterback, maybe will, but then they have decisions to make and what goes on all in between that. And nobody wants to take the chance. Again, to them, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
I'll be stunned if it happens, Mike, because to make it happen, a bridge will have to be built that is incapable of being built. That bridge has been blown to smithereens. Yep. The only chance would have been if Jim Harbaugh had become the head coach of the Vikings. I agree. Because Harbaugh believes in him. Harbaugh has told me in the past that you will win championships with an S with Colin Kaepernick. Now, that was 5 years ago. But you look at what he did for him recently at the Michigan spring game. I think Harbaugh would have given him a shot in Minnesota. And I reported a couple of weeks ago that actually when Harbaugh interviewed with the Vikings, Kaepernick was listed as a potential quarterback's coach if and when he's done with his playing career, that's what Harbaugh feels about him as a football mind who could help groom a young quarterback. So if Harbaugh ever gets back in to the NFL, that may be the path for Kaepernick, either as a player or as an assistant coach. And that would be great if it happened. Yeah,
but real quick, Mike, what was the one team that flirted with him a couple times? That was the Seahawks, right? Seattle kind of flirted and kind of talked about it. And now, look, they traded away Russell Wilson. It's not like they have their quarterback of the future on their team, right? So if there was ever a time, it's the same head coach there, same GM there, right? And they flirted with this, and now they don't have Russell Wilson anymore. If there was ever a time for that flirtation to grow, you would think it would be now, and we've heard nothing.
Unless, and look, I love Pete Carroll too, and I don't mean to preface every potential insult by saying I love a guy. Under that standard, I would love many people. But I think that this is just another example of somebody in the NFL willing to stand up and say, hey, this guy's a starter in this league. Hey, everybody. Hey, look, this guy deserves a spot like Pete Carroll did 5 years ago. Well, okay, Pete, how about you give him a job? Oh, no.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody else, not us. And that's how it works, I think, with the hiring of black coaches. Hey, we need to do this. This is the right thing to do. Well, so are you hiring a black coach? No, but somebody else should. And I think that's been part of the problem as well. So, but we're on the same page here. I will be absolutely flabbergasted and flummoxed if Colin Kaepernick ends up back in the NFL at this point. It will require something to happen that 5 years later, if it didn't happen after George Floyd was killed, it didn't happen now. There's no reason for it to just organically happen now other than Colin Kaepernick's thinking this is my last best chance to get back in. He's 34 years old or close to it. All right, let's go ahead and take a break.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.